The gravel crunching under heavy tires was the only warning Lena got, cutting through the silence of the acres she had fought to keep for the last 5 years. It was midnight, the air dry and still, carrying the scent of cured hay and cooling earth. Lena didn't hesitate. She moved with the practiced efficiency of a woman who lived alone on the outskirts, where help was a 30-minute drive away and usually arrived too late. She pulled the bolt-action rifle from the rack by the back door, checking the chamber in one fluid motion before stepping out onto the porch. The floodlights snapped on, bathing the dusty yard in harsh, artificial white, revealing a sleek, black sedan that looked like an alien object against the weathered wood of her barn. The car door opened, and a man stepped out. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than her entire harvest, his posture rigid, his hands empty and held away from his sides. He was Korean, sharp-featured, and terrifyingly calm given the barrel currently pointed at his chest. He didn't flinch at the sight of the weapon. Instead, he looked at her with an intensity that made the hair on her arms stand up. "I am not here to rob you," the man said, his voice a low baritone that carried easily across the yard. Lena tightened her grip on the rifle, stepping down the first stair, her finger resting on the trigger guard. "Then you're lost," she called back, her voice steady. "Turn around." He shook his head slowly, taking a step forward. "I am not lost. I am in need of a transaction." Lena laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "I sell soybeans and corn, not whatever you're looking for." The man stopped near the gate of the white picket fence, his eyes scanning her face, assessing her not as a threat, but as a solution. "I need a wife," he said. The words hung in the dry night air, absurd and heavy. "Today." Right now, Lena stared at him, waiting for the punchline, but his face remained a mask of stoic desperation. "My inheritance. My position. It requires a marriage certificate by sunrise. I can pay you enough to save this land." He gestured vaguely to the peeling paint of the farmhouse, having clearly done his homework. Lena lowered the rifle an inch.
He knew about the debts.
"You want a paper marriage," she said. "I want survival," he corrected. Lena looked at the desperate expanse of her fields, then back at the man who looked like he carried death in his pocket. "If you want a wife," Lena said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "then you don't leave. You live here. In my home. You work this land. If we do this, you don't get to be a ghost." The man paused, looking at the dirt on his polished shoes, then nodded once.
"Done."
"My name is Kong." The following morning brought the stark reality of the agreement into the unforgiving light of day. Lena woke up before the sun, her internal clock set to the rhythms of the farm, and for a moment, she forgot the stranger sleeping on the pull-out sofa in the living room. When she walked into the kitchen, however, the sight of his suit jacket draped carefully over one of her mismatched dining chairs brought it all rushing back. Kong was already awake, standing by the window, looking out at the expanse of dry fields that stretched toward the horizon. He had discarded the tie, and the top button of his shirt was undone, revealing a glimpse of a dark tattoo near his collarbone. He looked out of place, a pristine statue dropped into a world of dust and labor. "Coffee is in the pot," Lena said, moving past him to grab a mug. She kept her distance, treating him like a wild animal that hadn't yet decided if it was domesticated. Kong turned, accepting the mug she slid across the counter. "The paperwork is filed," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "My lawyers handled it while we slept. We are legally bound." Lena took a sip, the bitter liquid grounding her.
"Good.
Then you can help me fix the tractor." Kong stared at her, blinking slowly. "I do not know how to fix a tractor." Lena set her mug down with a definitive clink. "You're a husband now, Kong. You'll learn." She walked to the mudroom and tossed a bundle of fabric at him, an old pair of denim coveralls and a flannel shirt that had belonged to her father. "Put these on." "That suit makes me nervous." He looked at the clothes, then at her, a flicker of amusement breaking his stoic facade.
He didn't argue.
He stripped off the dress shirt right there in the kitchen, and Lena forced herself not to look away, noting the roadmap of scars that traced across his back and ribs, violent, jagged marks that spoke of knives and bullets. He was a man of violence trying to play house, and she was the one who had invited him in. "The bedroom at the end of the hall is yours," she said, her voice tighter than she intended. We share a roof, Kong. Not a bed. Not unless I say so. He pulled the flannel on, buttoning it with precise, deliberate movements. I agree to your terms, Lena, he said, using her name for the first time. It sounded intimate, heavy on his tongue. I honor my contracts. By the third day, the farm had begun to strip away the layers of the soul underworld that clung to him. Lena watched him from the porch as he struggled with the post-hole digger, his movements awkward but determined. He was strong, undeniably so, but he applied force like a blunt instrument rather than understanding the leverage the earth required. She walked down the steps, wiping her hands on a rag, and approached him. The sun was high and unforgiving, baking the ground until it was hard as stone. Kong was sweating, his dark hair falling into his eyes, streaks of dirt smudged across his cheekbone. He stopped when he saw her, leaning on the handle of the digger, his chest heaving slightly. You're fighting it, Lena said, stepping into his space. She took the tool from his hands, her fingers brushing against his. His skin was hot, his grip firm. It's not a neck you're trying to snap. It's dirt. You have to work with the grain of the soil, she demonstrated, the metal biting cleanly into the earth. When she handed it back, he watched her hands, his gaze lingering on her calluses. You do this alone, he stated, not a question but a realization. Every day, Lena nodded, looking out at the fields. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. It's stubborn, but it feeds us. Kong looked at the fence line, his eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned the perimeter, a habit she noticed he couldn't break. He was always watching for threats, even here, where the only enemy was the drought. It is defensible, he murmured. Lena laughed softly. It's a farm, Kong. Not a fortress. He turned to her, and the intensity in his eyes silenced her. Everything is a fortress if you have something inside worth protecting. The air between them shifted, charged with a sudden, confusing tension. Lena looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the man beneath the obligation. He wasn't just hiding here. He was looking for peace. Lunch is in an hour, she said, turning back toward the house to hide the flush rising in her cheeks. Don't be late. As she walked away, she felt his eyes on her back, a physical weight that felt less like danger and more like a promise. The truce of domesticity was shattered a week later, not by the weather, but by the world Kong had tried to leave behind. It started with a low hum of engines, distinct from the local pickup trucks. Lena was in the barn, stacking feed bags, when Kong appeared in the doorway. The transformation was instant. The farmhand was gone. The boss was back. He was wearing the flannel, but he wore it like armor now. His posture was coiled, his expression terrifyingly blank. Go inside, he said, his voice low and devoid of room for argument. Lock the door. Do not come out until I come for you. Lena dropped the feed bag, dust billowing up around her boots. What is it? She asked, though she already knew. Guests, he said simply. He turned and walked out into the yard, picking up a crowbar from the workbench as he went. It was a crude weapon, but in his hands it looked lethal. Lena did not go inside. She grabbed her rifle and moved to the shadowed loft of the barn, peering through the slats. 3 black SUVs had pulled up to the gate, blocking the exit. Men in suits spilled out, generic muscle, arrogant and loud. They shouted something in Korean, laughing as they kicked at her fence. Kong met them in the middle of the driveway. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He just walked toward them with a terrifying stillness. When the first man swung a bat, Kong moved inside the guard with a speed that blurred the eye. There was a sickening crunch, and the man fell. The violence was efficient, brutal, and silent. Lena watched, heart hammering against her ribs, as her husband dismantled 6 men in under 2 minutes. He didn't fight like a brawler. He fought like an executioner. When the last man scrambled back into the car and the SUVs peeled away, kicking up clouds of dust, Kong stood alone in the driveway. He took a deep breath, dropped the crowbar, and looked down at his hands. They were shaking. Lena lowered the rifle, realizing that the safety she felt with him was a double-edged sword. He was a monster, but for the first time in her life, the monster was standing between her and the dark. That night, The silence in the farmhouse was different. It wasn't the silence of strangers, but the heavy, loaded silence of shared trauma. Kong sat at the kitchen table, a bowl of water and a cloth in front of him, trying to clean a split knuckle on his right hand. He flinched slightly as the water touched the raw skin. Lena watched him from the doorway for a long moment before sighing. She walked over, pulled the chair out opposite him, and sat down. "Give me your hand," she said. Kong looked up, his eyes guarded, waiting for the judgment. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "They will not return tonight." Lena didn't respond to the apology. She took his hand, her rough, warm fingers cradling his bruised ones. She dipped the cloth in the water and dabbed at the cut with a tenderness that surprised them both. "You fight like you don't care if you die," Lena said, her voice soft. Kong watched her face, his gaze tracing the line of her jaw. "I fight like I have nothing to lose," he corrected. "Or I did. Until I came here." The admission hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. Lena stopped cleaning the wound and looked up, meeting his eyes. The kitchen light hummed overhead, casting long shadows against the walls. "You have a home now, Kong," she said, her voice steady but her heart racing. "And you have a wife. That means you have something to lose." Kong turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. The grip was tight, possessive, desperate. "Then I will have to be more careful," he whispered. He leaned in just an inch, testing the boundary. Lena didn't pull away. In the quiet of the farmhouse, with the dust of the battle settled outside, the line between business arrangement and something far more dangerous began to blur completely. The days that followed were defined by a suffocating anticipation, the kind that hangs heavy in the air before a summer storm, though the sky remained relentlessly blue and clear. The farm had transformed from a place of labor into a staging ground. Kong moved through the property with a restless energy, reinforcing the weak points of the barn, checking the sightlines from the upper windows of the house, and teaching Lena how to reload faster than she had ever thought necessary. They worked in tandem, speaking little, but the silence between them had lost its edge. It was now a shared language of survival. Lena watched him from the kitchen island as he dismantled a pistol on her grandmother's lace tablecloth, his movements precise and almost hypnotic. He looked up, catching her stare, and didn't look away. The bruises on his knuckles were fading into yellow and purple echoes of violence, a stark contrast to the domestic setting. "You are staring," he noted, his voice low. Lena didn't flush this time. She held his gaze. "I'm memorizing," she replied, the honesty of it surprising her. "If they come back and things go wrong, I want to remember who I was fighting beside." Kong stopped his work, the metal slide of the gun resting in his palm. He stood up slowly and walked around the table, stopping just inches from her. The smell of gun oil and expensive cologne, now mixed with the scent of the fields, filled her senses. "You should not be fighting at all," he murmured, reaching out to tuck a stray curl behind her ear. His touch was electric, a spark in the dry air. "I should have sent you away." "You could make me leave this land if you tried," Lena whispered, leaning slightly into his hand. The contact was grounding, a tether in the spinning world of threats and contracts. "And now I won't leave you." Kang's expression crumbled, just for a second, revealing a depth of longing that terrified her. He was a man starved for something real, and he had found it in the middle of a dust bowl with a woman holding a rifle. "Lena," he said, her name sounding like a prayer. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, closing his eyes. "I have spent my life taking things. Territory. Money. Power. But this," he took a breath, shaky and raw. "I do not know how to keep this safe without destroying it." Lena brought her hands up to cup his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw. "We don't hide," she said fiercely. "We stand. That's what farmers do. That's what husbands do." The word hung there, stripping away the pretense of the paper arrangement. He opened his eyes, dark and searching, and for the first time, he didn't look like a boss or a killer. He looked like a man in love. The sun dipped below the horizon on the seventh day, bleeding red and orange across the sky, like a warning flag. The darkness that followed was absolute, the moon obscured by a high haze of dust kicked up by the wind. They were sitting on the porch, a bottle of whiskey between them, when the phone inside the house rang. It was a jarring, shrill sound that cut through the chirping of the crickets. Kong didn't move to answer it. He knew who it was. He knew what it meant. "It begins," he said softly. He stood up, the wooden floorboards creaking under his weight, and pulled Lena up with him. He didn't let go of her hand. Instead, he pulled her flush against his chest, his arms wrapping around her waist with a desperate intensity. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision, a searing claim fueled by the adrenaline of impending danger. Lena melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair, the taste of whiskey and fear on their tongues. It was a promise and a goodbye all at once. When he pulled back, breathless, his eyes were blazing. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice rough. "No matter what happens, you stay behind me." Lena grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling him back down for a fleeting second. "I stand beside you, Kong. Always." The first headlights crested the hill 10 minutes later, a convoy of violence snake-winding its way toward their sanctuary. There were no negotiations this time. The lead car smashed through the white picket fence, wood splintering with a sound like cracking bone, and skidded to a halt in the center of the yard. Floodlights from the house, rigged by Kong 2 days prior, blinded the attackers as they spilled out, but the gunfire started immediately. Bullets chewed into the siding of the porch, sending splinters flying. Lena was already inside, positioned at the window with her rifle, while Kong moved through the shadows of the side yard, a phantom with a pistol in each hand. The noise was deafening, a chaotic symphony of shouts and explosions that shattered the rural peace. Lena fired, the recoil of the rifle bruising her shoulder, and saw a man drop near the tractor. She didn't feel fear. She felt a cold, crystalline focus. This was her home. These were her fields. And the man moving through the gunfire outside was hers. She saw Kong flank the group, his movements fluid and lethal, taking down 2 men who were trying to circle toward the back door. But there were too many of them. "Kong!" she screamed as a figure emerged from the barn, a shotgun raised toward his exposed back. Kong spun, but not fast enough. The spray of buckshot clipped his side, sending him stumbling into the dirt. Lena didn't think. She didn't breathe. She racked the bolt of her rifle, exhaled, and fired. The attacker in the barn doorway crumpled. Lena abandoned her position, running through the kitchen and out the back door, rifle held high. "Get up," she screamed, sprinting toward where Kong was trying to push himself off the ground. Blood was dark against his white shirt, blooming rapidly. He looked up at her, eyes wide with panic, not for himself, but for her. "Go back," he roared, trying to stand but faltering. The remaining 3 men were regrouping by the cars, realizing their target was down. Lena slid into the dirt beside him, dragging him behind the cover of the heavy tractor wheel. "I told you," she panted, checking his wound. It was bad, but he was conscious. "I'm not leaving." She propped her rifle on the tire, firing blindly to keep their heads down. Kong let out a pained laugh, grabbing his fallen pistol with a shaking hand. "You are a terrible listener," he wheezed, smiling through the grit on his teeth. But a magnificent shot. The silence that followed the final exchange of gunfire was louder than the battle itself. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and hot metal. The attackers had fled, dragging their wounded, leaving the farm scarred but standing. Lena sat on the dusty ground, Kang's head in her lap, pressing a compress hard against his side. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes were open, fixed on the stars that were finally breaking through the dust haze above. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a trembling exhaustion. "You saved me," Kong whispered, his hand reaching up to touch her cheek, leaving a smear of dirt and blood. "I saved us," Lena corrected, her voice cracking as tears finally welled in her eyes. She leaned down, kissing his forehead, rocking him slightly. "The ambulance is coming. I called them before I came out." Kong closed his eyes, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "I think," he murmured, his voice fading as shock set in, "that I will renegotiate our contract. I want." "Forever," Lena laughed, a sob catching in her throat. "You're delirious." Save your strength, but she squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back, weak but present. Morning broke over the farm with a cruel beauty, the sun illuminating the bullet holes in the siding and the tire tracks tearing up the yard. Lena sat on the steps of the porch, a mug of black coffee in her hands, watching the horizon. Kong was inside, stitched up and sedated, sleeping in her bed, the real bed, not the guest room. The police had come and gone, their questions silenced by Kang's lawyers who had descended like vultures at dawn. The legal mess would be handled, the money would flow to fix the damage. But the shift in the air was permanent. Lena looked at her hands, still stained with gun oil she hadn't managed to scrub off. The door screen creaked open and she turned. Kong was standing there, leaning heavily on the doorframe, his torso wrapped in bandages, looking pale but upright. He shouldn't have been walking, but she knew better than to tell him that. He shuffled out, wincing, and sat slowly beside her on the step. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the wind ripple through the corn. I could leave, Kong said quietly, staring at the fields. Now that the threat is neutralized. I could annul the marriage. Leave you the money. You would be safe. Lena took a sip of her coffee, then set it down. She turned to him, her eyes fierce and loving. If you try to leave, she said, I will shoot you myself. Kong turned to look at her, and the tension in his shoulders finally broke. He laughed, a genuine, warm sound that felt like it healed something in the dry earth beneath them. He reached out, taking her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. The gold band on his finger caught the light, a prop that had become the most real thing in his life. Understood, he said, bringing her hand to his lips. Then I suppose I have work to do. The fence needs fixing. Lena rested her head on his shoulder, careful of the bandages. The fence can wait, she said, closing her eyes, feeling the warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. Just sit with me. We have time, and for the first time in both their lives, they did.